Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining our webinar today. My name is Andrew Talbot and I work for Global IM. We're using the Expat Financial Planning website as the forum for these series of webinars. We generally run them once a month or once a quarter on financial planning for expats. So they should be relevant to yourself. If you have any questions, then by all means you can ask questions during the session, or get in touch with us at the end or afterwards. We'll probably be in touch with you anyway. So we're coming to you from Singapore today. It's using the Zoom software and it's also live on YouTube. So if you're watching the recording of this, you have to get in touch another way. So today we're going to talk about the secrets of retiring as an expat or a happy expat, and specifically using multiple streams of income. And it's really to do with what happens with when you're living abroad as an expat and you're going to retire. Do you retire to your home country or do you retire to another country? And some of the factors to think about when we're doing this is what type of country you're going to live in, where will you live? And it depends on the quality of life, standard of living that you're looking for, your health, your ability to move around. It's really down to your individual. So there's a little infographic there explaining all of the different options that people consider when they're looking at a place to live. It's really that you're going to retire to another country or your home country, or you might split your retirement to different countries. If you're split your retirement to two different countries, then there are some more factors to consider. One of them being tax. And a lot of people, what they want to do is try and get to this tax nomad status, which is really a tax resident in a number of different countries. You really need to have 183 days in each country or 3 months to try and attain this tax nomad or fiscal nomad. Being aware that changes in tax systems may make this a little bit harder in the future. It's certainly getting harder than it was maybe 10 years ago, mainly due to disclosure of the CRS, which is the Common Reporting Standards. And you may have done this already with your bank or insurance company, where you have to declare where your actual tax residence is by completing a form. This is information that goes to the local tax authorities, and then they share that information around the world with other tax authorities. If you're trying to hide information, then it becomes more and more difficult to do so. What we try to do is see into the future. So how much do you need? What are your expenses? And how can you see if there's any unforeseen events or plan for some events in the future? And these generally tend to be something like healthcare or long-term care, but they can also be factors such as flights around the world to see the children. If you're an expat family, then likely that your kids have gone into international schools, they lived in different countries, they've got friends that are in different countries, they may even work in different countries to what you're considered your home country is, or the country that you're currently living in. So there's lots of different factors to consider that will affect your retirement. Your health is the big one. If you're not in a country that has a state health system, then you're going to have to use insurance in order to provide that coverage. This will go up as you get older, and if your health deteriorates, then the cost will go up. So it's a big factor to think about. And also your retirement income. Now this could be in a different currency, you've got different tax to consider, but it's also the level of retirement income that you would like, and the level of standard of living that you would like. So big factors to think about. You also need a property to live in, or maybe 2 properties or 3 properties, depending on if you're trying to live in a number of different countries. And then the other big factor is travel. This will make a big difference if you're living in 2 countries, because you've got to travel between the 2. But as I said before, with your family or an expat family, they're going to live in different countries as well. So you're going to have to travel between those, see the kids, maybe see the grandkids. So it's a big thing, a big cost to think about. So what do we need to move on to? Well, today is talking about how to create this multiple streams of income. And your income is the level that you need when you come to retire. And we'll come on to a case study later on. But it's the amount that you need to maintain that standard of living. And this can come from lots of different factors. And there are books that say there's 7 different levels of income. Today, we're going to concentrate on a number of them. You can see whether or not it fits into what you want to achieve. But the idea is to try and create as much different streams of income in order to maintain the number that you need. So what is that number? That's the number you need to think about. So one thing is to think about, say, a small business or part-time work. If you're working in a full-time job or you're in the corporate ladder, then you may want to look at directorships or moving down to have a small business or to just work part-time consultancy or directorships. It adds that extra income into retirement. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to stop work on the day that you finish. You can continue for a number of weeks or a number of months afterwards, or even a number of years. There's also government or social security. So this could be state pensions, or it could be a security payment from the country. It tends to be that you have to live in that country in order to gain that entitlement, or you may have to retire to the country to get that. But it's worth checking out to see if your home country offers this, because it's another stream in retirement. There's also rental property. And this is a great way to get an extra income from tenants that are providing that income from the properties that you own. They tend to be very consistent if you have the right property. You've got to be aware of tax, and we'll come on to that later. There's also cash and just a normal conventional pension scheme. Now, cash can just be a bank account to hold it, and a pension scheme could be a scheme that just provides you your old company pension scheme or something that you've set up. It can also be an investment portfolio. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a pension. It could just be a retirement fund, a portfolio that holds a number of different assets, shares, equities, etc. Fixed interest can provide that level of income. It's just setting that amount that you need when you come to retire. So if we take an example, this is how to generate 100K from multiple streams of income. And if we look at, we've just used 5 here. So 20,000 would come from a rental income, 30,000 will come from a consultancy or part-time work, 20,000 will come from an investment income, and 20,000 will come from a conventional pension, and maybe 10 will come from a state or pension or security. It's very broad in that we pick these categories and the amounts. We haven't really taken into account tax or any other further details that will make a difference to whether this works. So if we move on to looking at some of these details, we can take an example of, say, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, UK nationals, both in their late 50s. They've lived overseas for 20 years. The children live in different parts of the world. Maybe got a home in the UK, a home in Europe. They want this 100K. So how will they come about to creating it? Well, they'll both receive a state pension of, say, 8,000 each today. Mr. Smith has a pension scheme that provides him 35,000, and they have a buy-to-let property that provides rental income of 25K or buy-to-let portfolio. Therefore, they're short another 24,000. But they need a portfolio of 600,000 in order to generate that 24,000. And that's at a withdrawal rate of 4%, which is generally a conventional withdrawal rate. Just using theory about how a portfolio can generate income. In this example, we've used 4 different ways in order to generate the income. We haven't considered whether or not Mr. or Mrs. Smith want to have a part-time job or the directorships. They may also want to have a small business. So there's other areas that they can generate an income from. If we go a little bit more detail, a little bit more scientific, we can use cash flow forecasting in order to predict what the income will be when it comes to retirement. The closer you are, the easier it is to actually predict it. If you're 20, 30 years away, it's incredibly difficult. It's almost just a guess in order to say that how much do you need. But it's understanding that to assess what your current assets and liabilities, your income and expenditure, and then you add in your goals and your aspirations into it. You're just trying to build this picture for the future and adjust it when you need to. If you've got any future changes, maybe children are kind of leaving university, or you decided that you want to buy that extra rental property, or that you want to not live in those 3 countries and narrow it down to 2, maybe some winter sun, then it's the idea is to try and predict it and see what the implications will be for you. I've got to allow for all these sort of the economic conditions as well. What happens if there's a market crash? Will that affect your income? If you've got multiple streams, then really you're diversing away from having, say, an equity crash. It's not really going to affect your rental income too much, or your small business, or your directorships. If your money is, or your income is coming from a portfolio, then an equity crash can make a big difference to how much you can take each year. But what we're trying to do is identify all these shortfalls and surpluses to build in these what-if strategies. Now, if I move on to how it looks like, this is an example of a cash flow forecasting that we do. The blue bars is the level of Mr. and Mrs. Smith's income. The black line is their needs or their expenses. So pre-retirement, they're obviously not, they're saving money, they're not spending more than they earn. And when they come into retirement, you can see that the yellow bars are the savings and investments, and the orange is state pensions. And they've got a bit of pension scheme from the green, and as you can see, the blue continues into retirement. So that could be rental income, or that could be part-time work. They actually have a shortfall. And if we go on to just taking out the details, you can see there's a shortfall in the final years. This shortfall really depends on what the expectations of the expenses are. And it's a massive factor to determine whether or not you're going to run out of money or not. So understanding how much you're going to spend in retirement, including those health costs, including those travel around the world, is very important. It's also that expense line is very linear. In reality, it drops off, and you're trying to give assets away to children in order to get around death duties or inheritance tax. But the idea is to try and predict what your level of income is and where you can get this from. If you wanted to save this shortfall for this particular scenario, then you'd need 150,000 investment today to get rid of it, or you can put away £4,000 per year. If we move on to what the assets will look like, this is how the assets increase and decrease over time. So you can see where the non-liquid assets, which is likely to be the properties, have increased over the period that they've been held. Again, it's very linear and doesn't necessarily mean that this is what happens in reality. But you can see where the investments and the pensions will tend to fall off as they get extinguished. So how you take your income will depend on where the stream is from. If we go further into it, you can see that the pensions and the inheritance, the pensions and the cash and the investment portfolio tend to really fall off as they've been extinguished. So you don't necessarily want these streams to dry up. If they had a rental property, then it's unlikely that this is going to start to dry up. So think about the goals and the financial planning. How much money do you need at that retirement date? And then where are you going to get it from? How long have you got in order to get to that point? And how much do you need to raise, or what type of assets do you need to create in order to produce that stream? Having this broad mix of streams will help you get to the goal. And it's different levels of asset allocation. You can then also monitor them just to make sure that the rental income is coming in, or the portfolio is making enough to take those 4%, or your pension scheme is on target if it's following a particular benchmark. So really, which streams apply to you? If we go further down into different asset classes, you can see that you've got cash, fixed interest, shares, property, and other alternative investments. They each have their own benefits and they each have their own disadvantages. And it's understanding the risk level that applies to you. If your alternative investments were, say, art, antiques, collectibles, as we have here, then that market is very unpredictable. And the same with shares, it can be very unpredictable in the short term. Over the longer term, you tend to get a much more smooth effect. Whereas something like property, in the short term, you know that you're going to get that particular rental income. Over a number of years, you can't really predict what your tenants are going to be like. The only one that you can predict is cash. You know what it is, you know how much it's going to produce, it's just that it's going to be eroded by inflation. one thing to think about is the ownership of property. So you need a place to live in, and you need a place to holiday or to retire to, but there's always tax on property. And around the world, it's becoming more and more of an asset class that governments can attack in order to raise revenue. So the tax on property is going to increase in all of these different locations. For example, in the UK, if you took income tax on the rental, it's 20%. You actually get to sell it, then you got 18 or 28% capital gains. There might be inheritance tax of 40% on it. And then if you keep trying to buy buy-to-lets, and you're paying an extra 3% of stamp duty every time. So it's quite a highly taxed asset. As revenue is raised from UK property, governments around the world can see that this is a particularly good asset class to generate their cash. So you can see some of these measures that have happened are happening around the world. Extra stamp duty, capital gains being implemented, income tax on rental. So you have to think about these factors when you try and drive a stream from it. One thing to think about is we always look at the components of financial planning. So step one is why, always why. What do you want to do? Do you want to retire? Do you want to give money away? Do you want to fund your kids' education? Do you want to buy that house in the winter sun or in a lovely part of the world? The next step is how. And it's always a vehicle to do this. This could be that property. This could be the bank account, or it could be an insurance policy, or it could be an investment portfolio. It could be money with a private bank. It really depends on how you try and achieve step one. Step three is just the details involved in it. So where does it get allocated? It could be shares, it could be fixed interest, it could be investment funds, or it could just be cash. It could be the amount of money you have on the insurance policy. Or it could actually just be that house sitting in Thailand or Spain, to actually say that that's my house to live in. So understanding all of those different steps, but always start with step one. Thank you very much. Hopefully it's been food for thought for you. Please get in touch if you have further questions, and we'll be happy to help you achieve your goals. Thank you very much.